For decades, administrators navigated discipline by swinging between two absolute extremes. When tested against modern classroom realities, both of these models break down. On one end of the spectrum is traditional out-of-school suspension, or OSS. It relies on the assumption that removing a disruptive student restores order and deters future misbehavior. This line graph compares long-term student outcomes. Removing a student triggers secondary deviance, permanently labeling them a troublemaker. 12 years later, students suspended for the first time show a catastrophic drop in diploma and degree attainment, while their arrest rates climb. Recognizing these harms, some districts swing to the opposite extreme, passive non-intervention. Here, structural consequences are completely eliminated, and behavioral correction is reduced to verbal pleading from staff. Removing a student destroys their long-term trajectory, but pleading with them fails to maintain the boundaries necessary for learning. Neither approach simultaneously achieves classroom order and student retention. When administrators drop structural boundaries entirely, they create a behavioral vacuum. Without predictable consequences, minor disruptions compound. The quiet majority of students in the classroom are systematically robbed of their core instructional minutes, while the teacher attempts to manage the chaos. This causal loop maps the hidden cost of chaos. Passive discipline causes unchecked classroom disruption, creating continuous stress that drives severe teacher burnout. This burnout triggers a severe spike in chronic teacher absences, further degrading the climate and accelerating the destructive cycle. Arresting this collapse requires replacing both extremes with a data-driven framework, the two-track disciplinary matrix. Effective school climate repair cannot rely on the subjective emotional reactions of tired staff. It requires engineering objective, internal administrative architecture that holds students accountable without pushing them out the door. Traditional discipline fails by treating minor tardiness and active defiance with the same blunt instrument. The matrix solves this by routing infractions into separate pathways. Track 1 routes low-level logistical blocks parallel to the academic core, enforcing a consequence without ever interrupting instructional time. This track strictly targets logistical friction, chronic tardiness, dress code deviations, and minor policy adjustments. Instead of sending students home, Track 1 triggers progressive lunchtime detention. Empirical data proves that classmate absence heavily damages the broader instructional environment. Utilizing a midday consequence leverages the loss of social and electronic time as a meaningful penalty, while fully preserving the student's core instructional hours. Suspending a student for an attendance issue mathematically worsens their absence rate. Keeping them in the building prevents a minor misstep from triggering academic failure. Isolating these logistical issues into an internal daytime track ensures that minor infractions do not compound into catastrophic learning loss. Lunchtime detention solves a hidden structural barrier embedded in standard after-school disciplinary models, the transportation equity gap. After-school consequences create logistical strain. Late bus constraints or parent pickup requirements force low-resource parents to leave employment hubs midday, actively destroying their work schedules and income. By utilizing the student's existing presence during lunch, this transit requirement is completely eliminated. The intervention occurs natively within the school day, requiring zero external travel coordination or labor from the family. If a behavioral policy requires uncoordinated external labor from economically vulnerable parents simply to be completed, the policy itself is structurally flawed. While Track 1 handles logistics, Track 2 specifically addresses active behavioral defiance and high-level insubordination. Here, the operational necessity is strict. The school must enforce high-stakes consequences to protect the teacher's classroom, but doing so via out-of-school suspension immediately triggers the secondary deviant cycle.
To balance these opposing forces, Track 2 introduces the athletic compromise, a serve first, play second framework. Students must complete mandatory after-school detention before being permitted to attend practices, clubs, or competitions. Athletics and extracurriculars act as crucial psychosocial protective factors. Maintaining a defiant student's access to these programs keeps them actively tethered to the school's culture. Executing this requires overcoming a massive systemic hurdle. Pervasive nationwide bus driver shortages regularly force schools to cancel the late transportation needed to run after-school programming. To prevent this operational friction from falling onto teachers and administrators, the district must mandate internal, school-arranged supplemental transportation. Securing dedicated transit stabilizes the intervention model. Leveraging extracurricular access creates a powerful behavioral deterrent. It extracts a high-value consequence from the student without severing their final positive connection to the institution. The actual consequence mechanism inside Track 2 is a highly structured 20-minute restorative circle protocol. The intervention removes desks and tables entirely. Stripping away physical barriers forces vulnerable eye contact and breaks down defensive posture. Order is maintained through the strict rhythm of the talking piece. Only the person holding the object may speak, requiring others to listen. The first phase of the circle is inquiry. The facilitator guides the student to identify exactly what was happening in their environment right before they made their choice, mapping their specific behavioral triggers. The second phase is impact. The student must confront the ripple effect of their actions, specifically addressing how their outburst robbed their peers of focused learning time. The final phase is active repair. The student cannot simply sit in silence to run out the clock. They must co-create a tangible consequence, like drafting an apology or completing classroom service, and sign an agreement before returning to their athletic activities. Facilitators are trained to recognize that when a student lashes out with profanity or blames others, their high-stress reaction is actively blocking their prefrontal cortex. The protocol forces a cool-down period, so logical processing can resume. True behavioral correction means pulling students out of passive, isolated punishment and forcing them into active, uncomfortable community accountability. Beyond correcting student behavior, the two-track matrix provides macro-level protection against individual administrative liability. This chart tracks a federal mandate under IDEA and Section 504. Exceeding 10 cumulative suspension days for a protected student triggers a mandatory placement change. By diverting consequences laterally into internal tracks, administrators keep suspension totals suppressed, safely below federal trigger lines. Furthermore, relying on objective routing criteria protects the institution against Office for Civil Rights investigations. Instead of trying to defend subjective staff reactions to insubordination, the school can present a data-backed structure. Implementing a formalized matrix transforms student discipline from a subjective legal vulnerability into a documented, highly defensible operational framework. The failure of modern school discipline is rooted in the assumption that we must choose between abandoning academic boundaries or abandoning the student. The two-track matrix replaces that destructive dichotomy. Track 1 solves the transportation equity gap, isolating minor logistical infractions into midday interventions that ensure absolute instructional continuity. Track 2 addresses defiance by utilizing extracurricular access as a behavioral lever, requiring rigorous restorative reflection before a student is permitted to play. Together, they provide administrators with exact mechanical levers to restore classroom order without contributing to the school-to-prison pipeline. True educational leadership requires moving past punitive exclusion. It requires architecting discipline systems designed to hold students strictly accountable while keeping them securely anchored inside the academic community.